Laker fans, stand up. You finally have a podcast that represents you. Make sure you check out Lakers Reign podcast with yours truly, Nick Hamilton. Every week, we have the latest news on the purple and gold and what's going down on the court.
This is Mitchell.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Nate Boyer.
This is Hilliard Guest.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Rob Bell.
This is J.R. Robinson.
This is Dan Stone.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, I'm Mark Valley.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is Fred Leland, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero, Mark Valley, and Pete A. Turner.
Joining us on the show for the fourth time, our frequent listeners will know him, recognize him, love him like we do, our friend Fred Leland, who is an author, a retired police officer from Walpole, Massachusetts, and the founder of Law Enforcement and Security Consulting. So typically, as an author and as a trainer of police force, community policing, things of that nature, the policing soft skills, we typically will turn to Fred whenever we have questions about tactics, about statistics, about the way that policing is evolving in our country as our citizenry evolves. And so here we are. Thank you for joining us again, Fred.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Fred has a book out called Mission Command: The Who, What, Where, When, and Why. It's an anthology put together by Don Vandergift, who's also a guest, and Stephen Weber, who will be a guest at some point here in the near future. So I definitely want to talk about your entry in the anthology, but you were talking to us off mic about when we first got you on and the stuff that happened in Ferguson and where we're at now and what the numbers say. What do the numbers say up to this moment?
Well,
what are you seeing, Fred?
The numbers of overall homicide, crimes up, violent crimes up about 4%. Deaths are up about 8%. Homicides are up about 8%.
Is that year over year?
That's it annually. Yeah, it's gone up over the last 2 years. That's how far it's gone
terrible.
up. And
then 8%
is terrible.
That's not good.
Yeah, it's an increase. It's not in police shootings now. I don't want to mix it up because we'll come back to that. But that's overall homicides. In the African American world, which is what Ferguson and the issues that we're currently seeing that have been continuing now since August of 2014. I mean, it was evolving before that, but that Ferguson was really what took this and really brought the climate to this crescendo it's at and it stayed at, including up till last week with the NFL and guys taking knees during the national anthem, which has certainly brought it back into light. So it goes back to our first show. And what's interesting about it is in 2016, you had about 900 additional blacks were killed as compared with 2015. And that brought the homicide victim total for African Americans up to like 7,881. And that's, it's just terrible. And that about 92% of those, of the African Americans murdered, about 92% of them were by other African Americans, not by the police. I bring it up because it seems that the mantra in the media and in these other organizations is that police are out there just killing young African American men, almost like they're hunting them down. So it's just not the case, and that's what worries me. I have no problem with people protesting, and I don't think most police do. Police have to be involved when protests turn into violence and so on and so forth, or they're at the protest in an effort to keep it from turning to violence, which doesn't always work out, as we've just seen recently in Charlottesville.
Right.
But at the same time, I like to see some stuff based on facts, and for some reason in today's climate, with the 24/7, 365-day media, the facts don't seem to be what's touted. It seems to be whatever makes news. And if an officer does happen to be involved in a violent encounter, we got to understand policing. Policing's interesting because obviously the enforcement side of policing is about 4 to 5% of all police do. 4 to 5%. The rest of it's service.
I want to slow you down there. You didn't say 45%.
Yeah,
you said 4 to 5%.
Yeah.
Between 4 and...
You got it. Yep. Between 4 and 5%. Right.
How does it break out, Fred? If you're looking at 4 to 5% of policing being the enforcement things, the things that we think of when we think of a police officer being active on duty, actively engaged. Yeah. It's the 95, 96%.
The 4 to 5% is the typical things you think of. That's the arrests, tickets, summonses, the typical things you think of when you think of a police officer. Or what makes let's say it this way, what makes the job exciting to think about. You know what I'm saying?
But even you're talking about issuing traffic tickets is part of that 4 to 5%.
Yes, traffic tickets is part of it, and enforcement about 4 to 5%.
Well, right? I thought you were just talking about, let's say if we can just lump it into cuffing people. But that includes every aspect of enforcing the law, including writing a traffic ticket. What is the rest of that 95%, Fred?
It's service related. We do everything, investigations. You do work with the youth. You work with the elderly. You work with mental health people. You work with all these other businesses in the community. It goes on and on and on. There's a host of things, and a lot of it's intangible stuff you don't measure, or you can measure, but you don't measure it. And we're slowly starting to measure it now. And I say, when you say, how do you measure it? Somebody goes, well, how do you put a number on it? You know what I'm saying? But there's examples like if you go to, let's combine them. Let's say you go to a domestic violence call, for example, and you get to that call and an arrest is made, right? And the individual whose arrest is taken, transported to the station. Now you got an officer who stays. The officer helps this victim, spends an hour or two getting her the services she needs to help herself out from the abuse, the counseling she might need, helps her with her rights, all those things that hardly ever get spoken about in the police world. The only thing that usually makes news is that an arrest was made. Somebody was abused and an arrest was made, but nobody talks about these types of things. And that's what the 95% of the job is. That's just one example of it, but it goes on and on in a host of different things, different services police officers provide. And even the cops look at it like it's not real police work. A lot of them. That is real police work. That's what police work is. Police work isn't just about arresting people, because if it was, it wouldn't be only 4 to 5% of policing, right? It would be much more. So there's biases and there's myths about what the job is, not only outside from people who don't do it for a living, but even within policing, it's there, and those types of things become problems.
Well, let me interject, because
go ahead.
Knowing what I know about you and your work at LESC, and folks, if you want to visit Fred's website, it's lesc.net. That stands for Law Enforcement and Security Consulting. And there's a fair bit about the curriculum that you've developed that's on the website that you can read about. But the part that blows my mind is when you say that even a lot of police officers don't consider that real police work. Because if we take the word police away for a minute, what you have in every person who's wearing a badge and doing the job is known as a sworn peace officer. By the nature of the title, means that your job in total is not just arresting people, it's just keeping the peace.
Right. Look, for example, look at the name of my business. You just gave it out, right? Law enforcement and security, right? So law enforcement. See, I put this was 2006 when I put this out. I never gave much term, right? Law enforcement. I prefer policing, right? Or peacekeeping, right? The term policing is so much more holistic of what we do. Law enforcement is a small part of policing, right? But we like the term law enforcement officer, because that's, I'm speaking for myself from my experience of 30 years. All right, is law enforcement's a sexier title. You follow?
Yes.
Right. For us macho guys, we like that term. We're taking bad guys off the streets. We're pulling them in. Don't get me wrong. That's part of the job. It's part of why you became a police officer, but it's not the sole reason you became a police officer. That's part of what we do, all right? And all these other things, and we're slowly evolving into this now. Over the last few years, we're seeing more and more of it. I mean, we've been talking about community policing for 40 years, right? Since the 70s, all right? It's been talked about. Late 70s, we've been talking about community policing, problem-oriented policing, yet slow to evolve. The places that implemented it robustly, in other words, they made it part of their culture, they've had great successes in policing. The ones who focus solely or more focused on the law enforcement side of it have successes, but they also we can develop these climates where people feel like they're being abused by the police, if you will, or the police are abusing their powers, or some of these attitudes that we're seeing. And don't misunderstand me. I'm a police officer. I understand why they feel the way they feel, because we focus on the physical realm. We focus on taking the bad guy off the street, of stopping the assault, of protecting others and ourselves from bad people. And that physical side is the focus. But sometimes we tend to forget the mental component, or even bigger, the moral component of the game. In other words, what we do, yes, we can do it, but what impact does it have? Take broken windows policing, for example. You guys understand that concept, but for the listeners, that's the idea that you don't let anything bad happen. You have zero tolerance towards graffiti and loitering and youth doing this and people doing these minor things. Now, yes, does that have an impact on reducing crime? It sure does. But and we can reduce numbers, because that stuff works. We find out where this stuff's going on. We send the officers to those hot spots. We hone on it. We prevent it from happening. But what takes place in a lot of these areas is that everybody starts to get labeled, or the whole neighborhood and everybody in it gets labeled a bad neighborhood. Therefore, everybody walking the streets is a bad guy or a potential criminal. You following me?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And give an example. Even in small town USA, where I worked in Walpole, 40-man department, a town of about 25,000 people, we have, in there's certain neighborhoods, but a certain neighborhood had Boston police come in, and they dealt with a gang guy in this area from Boston. And the next thing you know, all of us, that was a bad area. Do you understand what I'm getting at? That bias became real. And it wasn't everyone. It was that guy. It was that guy in that house. But now when we go up there, we're thinking, hey, the Boston gang squad was up here. This is a problem spot. And that's, that's not evidence-based. That's bias-based. And I'm not saying it to make everybody look like they're bad guys. I'm saying that's what happens in the world of policing. You're so focused on dealing with bad things, you forget about the good. And
that's what happens in the world of human beings.
Exactly.
It just gets amplified when your responsibility is the safety of everybody else. Because
perfectly put, John. Perfectly put. Because it's true. It's a human aspect. You don't have to be a cop. It's just the way we are as humans. When something's different or something alarms us, we tend to hone in on that. It's part of survival. It's part of how we survive as humans, that we do that. But like you said, when you're a police officer, it gets compounded. So now the next thing you know, you're going into these neighborhoods and you're looking at everybody with suspicion. I'm not saying you're not stopping and frisking everybody, but you're certainly in that neighborhood. You're looking at it different. So you have to try to be, as a leader in a police organization, you have to let people know, look, not everybody up there is a bad guy.
I have a question that revolves around this. So we have this is a bigger social problem. So we know from looking at the numbers that police officers aren't hunting black men. Like, that's just not what the norm is. There are instances with this tragedies, but
yes. And
then Devone Bogan's work with Advanced Peace, and we've had Devone Bogan on the show. Everybody should go check that out. They're powerful episodes, and Devone's work. Yep. He's proving this point that there are a limited number of people that are struggling they're harming the stability of the area. And if we focus attention on those guys and get them to transition out of this unstable place, the crime in the area plummets. Because as you were saying, it's not a bad neighborhood. It's a neighborhood full of people, but there are certain people that are causing a lot of trouble. But that isn't the narrative at all. The narrative is that there's white police officer dudes hunting black men and killing them, basically. And that's the bigger problem. And I'm assuming on the numbers you opened the show with the 7,000 homicides, that the great majority of those are, and this isn't meant to be a prejudicial statement, but the great majority of those are black males killing black males. These are civilians killing civilians.
You know what the number is? You know what the number is?
Tell me.
It's 92% of those, and those are African American numbers. That's 7,881.
Right.
Those are African American homicides, and 92% of them, 92% of them were committed by other African Americans.
Right.
Those murders.
So it seems to me that the problem is if we can get that number, if we can follow Devone's model and reduce the instability, and we can get that number to come down, where, like the guys told us on the show, I'm just trying to get the guy I'm working with to not pick up a gun. If we can get those guys some stability, get them some future, some hope, then we can start to bring that number down, which then would allow more of the police to come into the neighborhood. Because we're asking officers to go into an area that is dangerous, where they are targeted, and ask them to not change their assessment. Like, they're police officers. They have to look and establish patterns and find these things. But we're saying, do it to the benefit of everybody else, but don't you dare think that all of these people in this neighborhood are all bad, even though every time you go out, you're going out to the worst moments in someone's life, potentially. How do you combat that, Fred? How do you get your officers? I mean, you've been a lieutenant. How do you get these guys to go out there? I mean, you must have to rotate them. Can you rotate these guys out long enough for them to regain their positivity and their perspective?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I worked in a suburb, a small town, so I didn't have these gang-ridden problems that we're talking about to the level. But I also train guys from other organizations, and the bottom line is the cops still going to go out and do their jobs. Now, the Ferguson effect, we've heard the term, which means that since Ferguson, cops are turning a blind eye towards things. In other words, discretionary policing. My thing is discretion's huge in police work. Right, and part of taking discretion away from cops has created some of this problem. Zero tolerance laws or procedures. For an example, youth. When I was a young police officer in my town, I could wade into a party of 150, 200 kids and talk to them and have them dump their beers and send them on their way, with no crime. Just go home, right? Get out of here and don't come back, right? And not even call a parent. I want the cops to hear this conversation. The guys who have been around a while will understand this. New guys will be horrified. What's he saying? Right? Because 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it slowly started evolving into you're not cutting these kids any breaks. Right? No more. Get them into the system and let the system work them through diversion. You know what we found happened is they were more apt to stay in the system. All right? Because of zero defects. Cops used to talk to kids. They used to talk to youth. They used to lecture them almost like a parent figure, if you will, on the street. Hey, what are you doing out here? All right, you're not supposed to be drinking. Dump your beers and get your rear ends home. But that slowly became, and the reason why is liability. All right, we became risk averse instead of risk savvy. We started want to take all the risk out for the police department and the community. All right, and I guess I can understand that to a degree. But when you start getting so risk averse that you're zero tolerance even with kids, you almost can't help people anymore as a police organization. Does that make sense to you? What I'm saying there? In other words, if you're zero tolerance with everything, and you're just going to follow the letter of the law, all right, and not the spirit of the law, all right, then you're gonna get results where people are in the system, and once they're in the system, they stay in it, all right, and that's what they found. Is that's what was going on. So what we're trying to do now is give some discretion back to the cops on the street. The street cop, give him a gun, you give him a badge, trust him to do his job. Trust him to talk to a kid and know when he can cut a kid a break and know when the kid's too drunk that he has to take him home or has to call the parent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And do that. Give the cop that. But what's happened is if in some place in the world, some cop cuts somebody a break and that kid goes down the road and 4 hours later he's killed in an automobile accident, where's it come back to? It comes back to the police officer, the police department. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Well, didn't you talk to him 4 hours ago? Yeah, and he was fine. But, he didn't go home when you kicked him out of that party. He went to another party. Therefore, it's your fault. So what's happened is police departments became very risk adverse over the last 25, 30 years. All right? And they wanted these zero tolerance rules. With kids and a host of things. All right. And if it wasn't by law, it was through procedure. All right. Which is an internal policies and procedures are internal organizational things where laws are laws. And even the laws sometimes offer you more discretion than procedures do. So we become so procedurally driven, zero tolerance towards anything. And I'm using youth as an example, and there's a host of different laws where that's happened. But youth is important because they're our future. they're the future good guys or bad guys, all right, out there in the world. And cops working with kids on the street is so very important. I can't stress it enough when you're dealing with them. So to go back to Pete's, the work that Devon Bagdon's doing, which I think is a good thing, but you'll probably find a small percentage of cops who will agree that it's a good thing, because cops do cop work, right? What are we going to have ex-bad guys doing it for? That's the mentality, all right? And my philosophy is, if it works, why aren't we using it?
Why do cops have that, though? I mean, when there's such overwhelming data that what they do works, why wouldn't people who focus their lives on policing, why wouldn't they say, heck yeah, it's rough out here, and if we could reduce the 25 worst criminals in this area and get these guys, why do they blanketly reject it?
Well, I think this is my opinion. All right, my opinion is it's our egos. All right, it's ego driven. It's we're the guys who stop the crimes, and we're not as open minded as we need to be. Now that's changing in some places, and I've read a lot of stuff where guys have started to see work like this, and like the Vaughns, and then that Gary Slutkin, who does cure violence, is starting to see it. The positive side of it, but we're slow. We're very slow to evolve in our profession. All right, when it comes to that type of thing. And my philosophy is, if these guys, who better knows the bad guys on the street than a former bad guy?
Right.
Now, right?
Well, and the other piece is, who better to reach a guy who is, I mean, when you talk about the bad guys, they're out there, they're doing a bulk of if you're on Devon's target list, you're doing the bulk of the shooting in the community that he's working. And who can even reach those guys or understand what their life is like on a day-to-day basis, but the person who has navigated that same path? Because even the best community policing focused trained officer is still on the other side, and he's still an adversary to that kid as far as that kid's concerned.
I agree, and that's part of the issue. That's why we have to be open-minded. We have to open our eyes, open our minds, get out of the status quo, look at new ways. If it works, use it. It's very easy to prove whether it works or not, or if it doesn't. Right?
I'm going to challenge my partner's narratives here, because I don't agree with them. I don't think that the narrative that is, that has driven Colin Kaepernick to his knee is that there are police out there hunting black people. That's a really easy way to cook that down so that it can be dismissed. Some people will even say that, but I don't think those are the articulate ones. And I'll say for Colin Kaepernick that it's not that I don't think that he's out there protesting that police are out there hunting black people. The more complicated narrative that is being protested by him and by those who are a little more articulate in the community is that there are a greater percentage of black people who get killed who are unarmed, who are killed by police officers. Yeah. So it's not just that there are police officers running around hunting black people. It's that there are greater numbers, it's by percentage. The numbers are not great, but the percentages are greater. Where there are unarmed black people who are being killed by police. And then, to take it a step further, the amount of penalty for the killing of an unarmed black man is lower by percentage. So I want to throw in that complication because I think it's an important complication.
No, it is. It is important because the thing is this. There's a couple things. Now, I'm taking out, if there's a couple, are there bad cops? Sure there are. All right, we need to get rid of them. Are there some people who are good people who should not be cops? Sure there are. Okay, so let me start with that. Now, the unarmed black men that are being killed. All right, now some were unarmed. Some were trying to arm themselves with like a police officer's gun. But the media just pushes out he was unarmed because he didn't have a gun on him. If a police officer, somebody's trying to run down a policeman in a car, they call that unarmed. I call it armed. Right?
Absolutely. I mean,
Right?
you've weaponized your vehicle.
But they call it right. They call it unarmed.
But statistically
because you didn't have a
speaking,
gun.
that's an unarmed situation.
That's what they call him.
Okay.
That's what they call it. I say he's armed. All right. Knife. Some people want to say a knife. All right, is not armed with a gun. All right, and there's a lot of confusion over what that is. Were they assaulting the police officer? Did he take an example? This case is a tragedy. The Tamir Rice case. You're all familiar with that, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
The one in Cleveland with the young 13-year-old black male was shot and killed with a airsoft gun. Yeah.
Okay.
Those police officers got a call for a man with a gun in the park. All right. They're in Cleveland. They're in a crime-ridden neighborhood, gang-ridden neighborhood. They go to this call. All right, and they pull right up next to this young fella who was playing with an airsoft gun. All right, it didn't have any orange tip on it like they're making them now for the kids, so they can see the difference. That was off of it. All right, It looked real. The police, they pulled up right in front of him, pulled right up to him and shot him within seconds, right? Fractions of a second from the time the car wasn't even completely stopped. All right.
Sure.
Now there's a guy. Now the policeman felt as though he was armed. Now, matter of fact, the tragedy, the young man's gone, the family. I mean, anything like that's a tragic incident. Those policemen, though, in their minds, thought that was a real gun. You see, but that sparked what? Huge outrage and riots and protests, and as it should. I don't have a problem. But those cops were crippled. Those cops were crippled too after they realized what happened. This is a toy.
Sure.
Right? Because in the heat of the moment, they shoot this young man, and it's like it's like I'm now starting to get into that second part of your question. Why are the penalties against cops so? Why do cops get away with it, if you will, right? But and the reason they get away with it is the courts have studied this and say, look, in unknown circumstances, they're rapidly changing. There's a lot of disorder and chaos and all those types of things involved, and so they have to make split-second decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They are not to be judged in 2020 hindsight. But what do we do when we're sitting here now talking about them?
Yeah, we armchair quarterback it for sure.
Right, of course we do, and that's human nature. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but that's why the courts look at it different than we, the people, look at it. All right,
sure.
The courts are trying to understand the dynamics of a dangerous encounter. All right, where you're right there in front of it now. And they're looking at that moment the officers decide to pull the trigger. All right. And
it gets back to the community policing tactic because what ends up happening is I think that there is a margin of difference between interactions in bad neighborhoods and in better neighborhoods. And it's unavoidable that our current economic situation in this country means that there are more people of color who live in quote unquote bad neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think where we're missing the mark is not to dismiss the notion that there are, or even accept that that's the narrative, that there are police out there running around after black people. I think that the real difference, if we look at it honestly, is that there are heightened awarenesses, heightened sense of alert when a police officer has to go into a more dangerous neighborhood. If we take race out of the equation for the benefit of the doubt, because listen, I live in the most racially diverse city in the United States, and I know several cops in this town.
Yep.
And they're all different races.
Yeah. Right.
So when they go into a neighborhood where there's more guns, there's more violence, there's typically more crime, those neighborhoods happen to be more ethnic neighborhoods. So even if we say, listen, let's erase the notion of racism for a moment, not to ignore it, but just to look past it for a moment, the problem that we cannot ignore and the factor that exists in these statistics, the way that they look, is that there are heightened sensitivities that happen in neighborhoods that just happen to be populated by more ethnic populations.
And there's a lot of truth to it. If I'm working in an area where there's gunplay every other night, I'm going to be a lot more aware and alert and prepared for something bad to happen than if I'm working in a place where it's not happening. So that's a true statement.
And no matter what background you are, or no matter what color you are, no matter where you grew up.
I wanted to take a second out of the show and talk to you guys about our sponsor, WeFixYourScript.com. What I love about these guys is they're encouraging you, just like John, Mark, and I, to create something. If you think screenwriting is your thing, or if you've got a script that you're kind of stuck on, this is what you do. You don't got to buy anything. Just give these guys a call. Schedule a 15-minute consultation for free. It's WeFixYourScript.com. I highly encourage you guys to support these guys. Reach out to us. Reach out to them. Reach out to WeFixYourScript.com.
I think as human beings, that's going to be a true statement. And we're all going to behave that way.
I agree. I 100% agree with it. And I think that's the big step, is for us all to realize that. Mm-hmm. You know? Is to realize it's not just in racial neighborhoods. It could be, I think back, I've been married for 33 years. And I think back to when we first started dating, and then you go visit her family and she goes and visit you. Remember you're in a different place. You're in a different place. It feels funny. And you get into these, I remember one about Christmas. My wife would say, why does your family celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve and not Christmas Day? Right? And then I'd say, well, I don't know. We've always done it that way. Well, why does your family celebrate at Christmas? Now all of a sudden we're on a home Christmas having an argument when we're young, right? over the differences, right? Over the slight differences in families.
Yep.
Just in family differences.
Right. That's not a racial difference. That's just from one family to the next.
It's not. Right. It's bigger than, you know what? It's bigger than race. Race seems to be the burner. Right, that really gets things going, because of our history as a country. I mean, I think we've come a long way when it comes to race. I really do, and I think the police officers I've come across over my 30 years on the job, are not racist. Have I met some? Yep, but at the same time, 90-some-odd% of them are out there trying to do the right thing and look at everybody, if you use the term equally, to the best of their abilities. You know what I'm saying? And matter of fact, a lot of police officers will really try to avoid anything racial if they can. If they're especially working out in areas like I did, where it was mostly predominantly white neighborhoods, and would get nervous if they were dealing with the minority, because they were afraid, and they would talk about it. Now, I arrested this guy and we got in a struggle. I'm probably going to get in trouble. Those types of things. All right.
Well, I'm going to point this question at Pete now, because Pete's been in the unique situation where he was thrust into populations where we get over there, and by over there I mean the sandbox. Yeah. So whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq, where we're thrust into a situation, we being the American military, Pete has to be the boots on the ground. He gets out there, and he's looking at a group of people who, to us Americans, they're all, let's say, Iraqi.
Yep.
And then how much, Pete, do you encounter Iraqi subgroups who look at each other like, I hate those guys from over there?
Yeah, let me take your point further. Even if you speak the language, you are put into the same box. So even though interpreters don't necessarily like to be called Terps, they are from somewhere else. Like if Night Train is from Kuwait, doesn't like to be called Iraqi, doesn't like to be looked at that way, has lived in America longer than a lot of the people he served with. There's definitely a problem with how we segment these people. It happens all the time because it's hard to see these things. And one of the things I was going to ask you, Fred, and I'm going to answer your question in the same response here, John. Is it possible for a police officer to not really be a racist, but use race as a prejudice? Maybe they're prejudiced because of the thing they have. Because I do know that almost universally, every person that I know that's black that tells me a story have significant, multiple stories of being treated what they perceive to be unfairly by the police. So, and I understand that there's a balance there between.
Look, cops, my experience, and obviously there's differences out there, but my experience with police is I've been in a car, for example. My father-in-law passed away this year, but I've been in a car with him for an example, and he'd drive by police officers working details, and I'm going to use his language. He was a construction builder for years, so you know where this is going.
Yeah.
and he would say, He go, what the Christ? What the fuck, pardon my French, is wrong with these cops? They look so miserable, right? And I'm a cop sitting in the car with them. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, look at them. They just look at them. They're working a road job. They just look angry. They're pissed off. Who do they think they are? This is from people who love their son-in-law, part of the family. And they'd see that. So some of what we do in training, and I'm going back to this again, when we develop cops, is we teach them they have to have control, all right? And wherever they go and they talk, we're not, cops aren't great listeners, right? They're great talkers and order givers. You follow?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's what they were taught to do, right? And it's not the right way of teaching them, in my opinion. And that's what I do, is train police officers. We have to teach cops to reshape the circumstances, not just control them, all right? And I think I mentioned this in a show before. I'm trying to take that word control out of my vocabulary, because control means I got to do something now, all right? I use the example when I teach cops. They tell us to take control, and then they don't tell us how to do it. And I said, so what do I resort to? I resort to how I was raised. My father said, go mow the lawn. I'd say, why? Question his authority. Whack, right? I get whack,
yep.
right? And so that's what we go to.
Yeah.
So, and it's funny, and I'll use myself as an example. When I first got on this job, I'd stop a guy, 90-something%. People would just yes me to death. Yes, sir. No, sir. Give me their license, their registration. No matter how. Then every once in a while, I come across the guy, give me a hard time. And I started thinking about what the hell's going on. We'd end up in an altercation, right? Yelling at each other on the side of the road. And I'm like, what am I missing here? Why is some of these guys getting so angry? And it was all in your delivery. Simple little thing like telling somebody, I need to see your license and registration. And the person in the car would say, well, why? What did I do? And I'd say, hey, I need your license and registration first. All right. Then I'll tell you what you did. Well, I want to know first. No, you tell me now. I'm the policeman. Are you going to give me it or not? Because do you understand refusal to submit to a police officer an arrestable offense? Now, you see where this is going?
Yeah.
Right? It's going right down the wrong way because I have to control. Well, then you finally learn through some experience that, how about if I walk up to a car and go, hey, how you doing today? My name's Fred Leland. I'm with the Walpole Police Department. I stopped you for speeding. You were doing 50 in a 35 mile per hour zone. Is there any reason you're an emergency or a reason you're in a hurry? No, sir. I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to need to see your license and registration. All right. And then I'm going to go back to my car. I'm going to run you through the computer. And if you have an extensive motor vehicle violation record, I'll probably write you a ticket. If you don't, I'll probably cut you a warning. Fair enough? Fair enough. Do you know how the complaints dropped?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a whole different tone, a whole different experience.
It's just but my point is a lot of it. A lot of people are angry and they want to blame the policeman, the individual cop, right? Yeah. When the cop's doing what he was taught to do, all right? And we need to change that. At the recruit level, we have to start letting guys understand how important social skills are in our business. It was not emphasized for years in policing. I can remember hostage negotiation classes where you had to be a trained hostage negotiation to negotiate with somebody that was barricaded inside. Are you kidding me? A street cop should be able to talk to people that are in a bad set of circumstances, barricaded in a house. All right. Obviously, if they're armed, you got to bring out the other tools and the observers and the teams in case something goes bad. But any street cop should be able to have a conversation with somebody in crisis, somebody that's in a bad situation. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if a cop should be able to have that conversation, be trained, right? Everything had to have a certification or a piece of paper saying they were qualified. And a patrol cop, a lot of times I felt like when I was in my young career, a report taker. I went to the call, handled it, and wrote a report. And if it was anything bigger than that, it went up to the investigators. That's when I first got on 30 years ago. All right. So a lot of the policing is we get defensive. What we should be doing is not being defensive. All right. We should be opening our minds to understand that our training and the method we sometimes put into play haven't worked. Let's evolve. And I think we're starting to do that. But the reality of it is, don't just get defensive and back and try to circle the wagons. Open your eyes, open our minds, look at the truth. Because if I talk to cops in the squad room, most of them will laugh and agree that you're right. This is ridiculous, right? When you talk training. But what happens, I think, for us, and I find myself getting this way, and I'm willing to talk about it. I get upset. I watch the news, and I find myself getting upset. Jesus, they're calling every cop out there a killer. This is driving me nuts. It's night after night on the news. And most people get their information from just that 3-minute soundbite of the argument about the cops who are killing African-American people. And that's what they think the truth of the matter is, what they see on the news.
And the whole truth.
Why I love doing these podcasts, and I write about it. As a matter of fact, I wrote about it in the Mission Command book that Pete alluded to. I was the only cop that had a chapter in that book that was written on leadership. And it's about developing trust within the organization. And I was going to just read on crisis response, which is what I specialize in. But I said, you know what? I want to look at this from the perspective of police out in the community doing these things that we're talking about. Now, ultimately, policemen have to sometimes the circumstances make it reasonable for a police officer to, God forbid, have to shoot and kill somebody. That's the reality of policing. It happens. But it is so rare, as we talked about before. This hype is just out of control. But the sad thing is it's great for me to piss and moan about it, but it's there. It's happening. It's continuing, right? And part of it is, going back to what you were saying, is sometimes as police officers, that professionalism isn't there. It's lacking. We come across gruff. Like my father-in-law comes across gruff. I wrote an article several years ago about the power of a handshake, because I noticed police officers would go deal with a call. Now, in American culture, I don't know about you, but I'll speak for me. If I reach out to shake your hand and you don't shake it, I'm huge. I'm insulted and I am pissed.
Yeah, we're off on a bad foot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, right off. And I noticed that we weren't doing it. And that was, you know what that was from? That was from defensive tactics. Don't ever let nobody grab your hand. They can gain the advantage, right? And now we're losing simple courtesies that we offer. You know, my philosophy is shake a hand, right? Or at least fist bump the guy, something to let him know you acknowledge his existence. In America, you shake hands. It's as simple as that. If I reach out to shake your hand and you don't shake it, then we're off on a bad foot, right? Real bad.
Yep.
No, this is an important thing, Fred, that you're talking about.
It's
too,
so huge.
Because officers come with more gear on now than ever before. So they might have gloves on. You know, they might have sunglasses on or eye protection, you know, as they would call it. And you have all these things on. And if you come to my house and I offer my hand and you don't give it to me, my threat level just went up. You are now, you are about to cross into my threshold.
How about the sun, Pete? How about the sunglass thing?
Yeah.
I mean, the sunglasses, and then you talk to somebody, you don't have the common courtesy as a policeman to take them off.
Right.
People get insulted by that, right? They get hugely insulted by a guy wearing a sunglasses. Now, me, I'm a big informal dude. I used to never wear my hat. And then one day I was talking to a guy, and he's a big hat guy. My protest is you're writing guys up for not wearing hats when they're getting out of a car to help somebody in an accident or chasing a bad guy and they didn't have the hat on. You're writing them up, punishing them. I mean, come on, man, right? So I never wore a hat. I wore it on a detail or a parade or a ceremony.
Yeah, sure.
But when I was in my car, I was in there, but I never wore it, right, in my protest. But one day I was talking to a guy and he said, you know what? One of the reasons, Freddie, he goes, I wear it. He says, it's got nothing to do with punishing anybody. He said, I'd never do it. He goes, but I can take it off when I walk into a house and show respect.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great,
right.
That's a great tactic.
I went beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's the
that
same
is a
thing.
great
It's
tactic.
simple,
and I know that
simple things.
He's internalized it to the point that it's not a tactic anymore.
No, it's just
there
automatic.
There is a perception in the fact that he's entering your home and he's taking his hat off. And even if you're not a hat wearer, that's an old school respect thing that is so we're wired to understand what that means.
Yep.
There's a thing.
And like I said, when he told me that, I went, go ahead, Pete.
There's a thing that our buddy Jay Moore talks about. He learned it from an old comedian.
Buddy
Hackett, was to get in front of the mic before you start engaging the crowd, and you walk up to one corner of the stage, you say, hey, how you doing? Man, you look great tonight. Like you talk to like the dude, and the wife's like, oh, you recognize my husband. And you go to another guy and you're like, hey, how are you? You shake a couple hands, you look up at the balcony, even if there's not a balcony there, and you acknowledge those folks because they spent money to see you too. And in every profession, there's things like that. And that's what these things are. It's like, look, we're outside and the sun is going to absolutely give me a headache if I look at it. I would take my sunglasses off, but if you don't mind, I'm going to keep them on. You're playing the game. You're getting in front of the mic like, you're a person, I'm a person. Let me be respectful to you. And let me initiate that, because the cop is the one that owns that cultural respect piece. It's them. They're the one injecting into the situation. Even if it's a chaotic situation, they've got to find ways to get in front of the mic.
We have to be the professionals. And I'll tell you why. This is great, because this has driven me crazy. The FBI came out with, and the FBI has always done a great job with, like, cops killed in the line of duty and the research behind the types of cops and what were the characteristics and cost these young cops their lives. They come up with these things. And one of the things that was in it, there's a host of other things, but one of the things that was in it is the officer was too friendly, right? This came out 20 years ago. Right? Too friendly. And guess what guys started doing? Not being friendly. Right? Because of right. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's training. We take my thing. I wrote a piece on it. I got it. I can send it to you. It's on my website. I wrote it years ago. And officer friendly isn't a bad thing. Being stupid, being naive, officer friendly, like, is that a gun in your hand? Hey, how you doing? You know, with this gullible, foolish attitude. That'll get you killed. But you can still be. You can be friendly. It's courtesy. It's professionalism, and still have your Boyd cycle, your observation, orientation, decision, and action cycle working to see what's going on. Wow. But a lot of cops took that thing from the FBI and trainers took it, and we ran with it. Don't be friendly. If you're friendly, they'll see it as a weakness, and they'll attack, or you'll be assaulted and end up one of the statistics on the wall. All right. And I get where it comes from and what they're trying to do, but we tend to take these bullet points and run with them, and not look at it holistically, and that's part of the problem with police training, because it's all linear. We're trying to get better, and that's what I spend my time doing, is trying to get rid of the linear lecture approach. All right. And over the last 15 years, the first 15 years I lectured, I tell you what to do, but I learned something's missing here. All right. And we need to develop problem solvers and people to think on their feet and to look at what these stats actually mean, instead of looking at the bullet point saying don't be friendly to get you killed. Yeah. Look at it and go, what are they talking about here? They're talking about being naively friendly. Is a big difference. All right. But what happens is a lot of trainers and a lot of police officers believe if I'm friendly, I'm going to get taken advantage of. They're going to see it as weakness and they're going to attack. Is that making any sense? So yeah. I guess what I'm getting at is police training is part of this problem. Look, if I could just put the caveat, if there's a racist cop, I want him out of my profession. Yeah. I want him gone. But they're rare. So those guys are the problem. We need to get rid of them. What's happening with the good guys that are out there doing their jobs and trying to be good officers on the street, trying to protect and serve the way they want to, are out there doing these things, and they're doing it because they were trained to be a certain way. All right? Like I said before, and I've said 1,000 times, we're more highly educated police officers now than ever before. We do. We have more college-educated guys. I'm talking not just associates and bachelor's degrees, but guys that are out there with masters, lawyers. We got PhDs in this business today. Yet our training is still bad. And education's great. But if you don't know how to apply it to the street, it doesn't mean anything. And so we have to educate and train. There's talk out there that, hey, if we put the guy through college and he's got a college degree, maybe they don't need to go to the police academy, or maybe we can cut the police academy and only send them to so many hours. Or there's all kinds of talk. So we can't lose sight, because they're not both. They're not the same. Education's for the unknown. We're learning things now that we never knew. Training's now taking that unknown and how do we apply it to the street? And I think what's happened is because of the lack of time to train, good trainers have resorted to these shortcuts, right, in an effort to try to get police officers to look at the worst case scenarios.
Right.
And they're locked into that mode of, this is what they taught me, this is what I got to do. And the sad part is it takes a lot of years to realize some of the stuff didn't work. And so we need to start this stuff early on in their careers, right when they start.
Right.
We need to get them to understand social skills. And I've been lucky enough over the last, I've mostly spent my career developing veteran guys, but I've been lucky enough over the past 4 or 5 years to be getting more involved in recruits too.
Yeah.
And I've been doing scenario-based work with them, right? Where they have to solve problems. They love it. The young kids love the stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
once they get used, they love doing it.
You're bringing a different perspective, and anybody who wants to get better at whatever it is they're doing needs to collect perspectives, especially in police work. As a military guy, seeing the similarities, it's very simple to be internally focused, internally perspective, introspective, and yet you're engaging a population that needs you to be able to flip the camera around and see what they see when they encounter you as a force, as a person. And these are things that are very, very tough to do, to tell someone who's doing great work, who's trained well, but failing every day. Because, look, you can be officer friendly and go out and fist bump everybody and still be part of an institution that's us versus them. And them isn't all bad. There are some bad people in them, but there's also bad people on the other side.
Right. And policing inherently there's going to be violence in police work. It's just inevitable. Right. It's going to be there. It's going to happen. Despite your best efforts.
I would say that if we had a magic switch and we could take every quote unquote racist cop out of the system, we would still have the perception of racism, because that's harder to kill. Like overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, the valleys and the towns would be safe, quote unquote safe, right? Like people could walk around every day and not be killed. But the perception, the specter of the violence, of the danger, of the threat was always high. So the same thing applies here with police. Is you're fighting a fight on several different emotional fronts. Right. And there's two things. There's a racial component to it, right? Bias or whatever. But there's bad people in all races. Yeah. There's bad people. Yeah. And bad people who are going to take it to the level of trying to kill someone or kill the policeman are going to get shot. It's that simple. Yeah. All right. I start with my career. I was a Marine before I was a cop. I've spent my career, all the stuff I do is centered on good police work, officer safety, and effectiveness has been my thing for over 30 years. Right. I started out with guns and defensive tactics and those types of things, but it's evolved. So the reasons I got involved in fair and impartial policing and in the communication side and reading body language and recognizing patterns and studying Boyd and his work is because I said, wait a minute, we're missing something. We can't just focus on the physical. We have to focus on these other things. Right. We have to get cops to understand that. I'm a natural talker. I think you guys can sense that. Yeah, right? Yeah. But you have to work at it. You have to work at listening, right? Yes. Those things, those social skills are they are, if not more important than how you handle a gun. You have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to listen. You have to look at a feel for what's going on. We've always taught escalation, de-escalation, right? The principle, all right, in an effort to try to quell things. But we haven't taught the skills, those soft skills necessary, right? And obviously I like to call them smart skills, right? To steal a term I've seen recently, smart skills, because that's a combination of persuasion and force. That means I use everything in my power to persuade you to comply with me until you prove to me that that's not working. You're about to hurt me or somebody else. And then I have to go.
Then I got to hit you with my flashlight.
I have to go physical. And this is what I think people have struggled to understand. For some reason, a lot of people think that a cop can talk everybody into calmness. And you know what the thing is? They do it 90 some odd % of the time. Right. 1.4% of all our contacts, we said in the first show, and those numbers are still true to this day. 1.4% of the time cops use force out of 60 million contacts annually. We've talked about it before, but it's worth saying it again. 0.0002% of the time we shoot. All right. A police officer in careers of police officers, listen to this number. 2% of all cops will use their gun, fire their weapon in the line of duty. Wow. 2%. Wow. 2%. So there isn't an epidemic is the point. But at the same time, how we treat people in a free society matters. We have to show respect. Even when you're dealing with a bad guy. Now, I understand sometimes things can happen spontaneously, and there's not time to maybe do all these things we're talking about. That's the reality of policing. But the vast majority of situations, we can do that just by slowing things down. Tactics are about preparing ourselves to engage somebody, not just engaging them. There's too much rushing in police work, too much put the lights and siren on and bullet like Star Trek, right? Warp speed, right? To a call. What's that going to get you?
Right.
That's going to put you right in the middle of trouble. You know, it's tragic that because that's inherent in police work. A lot of guys think that I have to get to it fast. There's a false sense of urgency in a lot of what we do. When we need to get trained guys to understand, not everything requires you to put blue lights and sirens on. Not everything requires you to get to the front door. Some things you have to, a lot of things you need to park down the street, get out of your car, listen, observe, use all these techniques. They're not just buzzwords. You know, the OODA loop isn't just a buzzword. The OODA loop will save your ass.
Right.
The OODA loop will make you better on the street if you understand it and you actually thinking about it. Now, we do it naturally, but you have to, as a cop, you have to understand that's what you're trying to do. Think about it. You have to understand that you got to actually tone it up a little bit on a call, and you got to think tactically, and not just the black outfits or the camouflage outfits with the Velcro, right? And the guns and the running. It's all these other things that come into play. How we position ourselves, taking advantage of our environment, listening to people when we get to the house. Before we get inside, listen to the noise and what's going on. Listen to the discussion, the argument, before they even know you're there, right? And then when you do talk to them, listen more, all right? Engage, pay attention, keep your eyes moving, watch the body language, all those types of things. And then you start being able to interact in a way that you get results that keep you from fighting, all right? That keep you from fighting. Now, when I say that, I'll have cops say, well, listen to this guy. He thinks he can hug everybody. Back to reality. No, that's not what I'm saying. But you can certainly talk people out of doing bad things. And if they're the type of people you can't, then you have to know when to adapt. It's that simple. That's why developing cops to a high level of professionalism, there's what we're not doing. We're not training them to a high level of professionalism, despite what everybody, well, they're professionals. They're professionals. They go to an academy for anywhere from 12 to 26 weeks. They go to a 12-week FTO program when they graduate the academy. And then after that, they go once a year to an in-service training class that varies anywhere from a couple of days to Massachusetts a week, right? Once a year. And then maybe there'll be some specialized training in progressive departments where they'll do more. What we're trying to do now, I've been working on with an individual department, I won't name yet, but a chief reached out to me. They're trying to revamp and turn their whole police organization into a learning organization.
Nice.
And what we're trying to do is to take training. Yeah, we're trying to take training to a different level. In other words, I'm not saying we're going to throw out all formal training when you go somewhere and you sit in a classroom. No, we're going to revamp it so that while you're working, you're taking advantage in training. In other words, on-the-job training taken to a professional level. Not just being there, showing up, handling a call, and say, "Oh, I learned from that." Actually, trying to leverage the lessons right there, right? On every call that you can do, every opportunity you have to train, you're going to. I don't care if it takes 5 minutes to do it. That's all it takes. That's what we do. We learn something. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So learning is continuous. It's daily. It's not just, okay, he's graduated from the academy and FTO, set him free, right? It's he's graduated, he did field training officers for 12 weeks, and he's out there. Let's keep with it. And not only as a new guy, throughout your career. And this is going to be, it's fun to do it. It's going to be a whole different philosophy. And it's based on this mission command and adaptive leadership.
Sure.
It's based on that. It's about developing trust. It's about developing a culture that continually wants to learn. All right. And it doesn't, everything doesn't have to be formal. This is a big break. It's a big break to have somebody do. I've been preaching this stuff for 15 years, and it's finally somebody's seeing it. He's saying, "Hey, can we do this?" I said, "You absolutely can do it. It's just you have to reshape the culture. You have to get the right players on the department and everyone, as many as we can get." the vast majority of the guys to buy into this continuously learning, and they understand it's not micromanaging them, because it's not. It's just about, okay, what can we learn from that?
And as you do this learning thing, you have to also engage the population with this. Like, it can't be a secret.
Yeah, exactly.
There has to be a civilian entity that goes along and goes, holy cow, these guys are constantly, because they're going to tell your story outside of the institution. And if you're not doing that, that's where your work begins, with that aspect of it. How do we get the community involved each and every time we're doing these things? And I'll send that chief my invoice now for that advice.
But it's true. Yeah. You have to do it, and there's no doubt about it. The best training I ever did when I was in Walpole was when we had everybody involved, the communities, the business people, the schools, everyone, as many people as we could. I would invite learning.
Every member of the clergy, like, be my personal guest.
Yep.
Send them an actual invitation. Be my guest. Come in here and watch this, and then let those guys communicate that message back to their parishioners.
And you know what? And I want to get this point out. As we're doing these, as we're developing learning organizations, it's so crucial that we understand that when we critique, cops hate critiques. SWAT guys are different. They love them, because that's what they realize what they're doing. They're the high-end guys. Street cops don't like critiques. And I'm not saying everywhere, but the vast majority of them don't like them. Because why? Because in police work, most of the time when you're getting talked about doing something wrong, you're getting in trouble for it.
Right.
Right? You're going to get written up. Right? Even if it's something you didn't have your hat on, let's write you up, put it in your file. What kind of climate is that when you're talking about cops who have to go out and deal with bad situations?
Yeah. It's definitely not mission command focused, that's for sure, because you're going to be afraid to make any calls.
Exactly. Right? It's the same thing. And it seems like, okay, listen to it. No, this is real. If we're going to be able to do this, cops have to know when mistakes are made, they're not always in trouble. I'm not talking about gross negligence stuff. That's something different. Right. I'm talking about, things that we want to discuss on a call that nobody else knows about but us. In other words, we know, right? We could have set up we could have approached it differently. We could have done this different. We could have done that different. Those types of things. Something that's grossly, intentionally done or negligent, that's always bad, and it's gonna get us in trouble. But the little things that happen because it's the nature of a crisis. It's part of it. And we don't know everything. We're trying to figure things out as we go. And we try something that doesn't work, and then we have to adapt. Those types of things. That's how we're fine-tuning it. But we have to be as an organization, as a profession, we have to allow cops to be able to do that. We have to allow them to be able to talk about those little mistakes so that we can tweak them and hone them and get better.
Fred, it's always a pleasure, and it's always a tremendous learning experience to have you on the show. I want our listeners to know the book is called Mission Command, The Who, What, Where, When, and Why. Fred Leland, our guest, has a chapter in the book. Donald Vandergriff is, I think, the primary author of the book as credited, and so we want to give you guys a ton of press about this, because I think it's what we all should be focusing on, to understand the challenges behind community policing, and that it all comes back to community.
Yeah, and my chapter in the book I was asked to write it about policing, and I called it "Improving Policing with Mission Command in a Community Problem-Oriented Approach." That was the title of the chapter, and because I wanted to challenge myself, and I want this to be able to, not only for police officers and police professionals to read it, but I would like it, a civilian be able to pick up that book and read it and go, Jesus, this is kind of cool. And this, because what we do matters. If we win in the physical realm but lose the moral, the community, well, we're screwed. In a free society, we're screwed. So it's practical on many levels for anybody who's in a profession that involves interaction with the public. Take a look for it, everybody. Google it. It's available on Amazon. We'll put a link on the show page. And again, the book's called Mission Command, The Who, What, Where, When, and Why, an anthology. Our guest and our good friend is with us. Thanks again, Fred Leland, everybody. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you very much.
Hey, make sure you guys tweet at Fred Leland at LESCnet. LESCnet.
Fred, but yeah, I'm going to go pick up all the pieces of my blown mind that are all around the room now.
I'm sorry, man. I get passionate about this topic because there's a fine damn balance, because I mean, I want cops to be safe and not be afraid to make decisions, but at the same time, we got things we can learn. We can improve upon. It's as simple as that.
Well, and create an interaction rhythm with a public that not only is adversarial, but really beneath that depends on the police to keep the peace.